Ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you all over the world, and welcome to the very first edition of our VoltaChem Power-2-X Tour. And these are online talk shows. I will be the host of all these shows, and in these shows we discuss the key developments in industrial electrification. And we're gonna do that. I'm not gonna do that by myself. I'm gonna do that with these beautiful table guests that are sitting here. So welcome to all of you as well, and I will introduce you shortly, of course, to our guests that are watching the very first of this session. And today we are live from Uniper. Yolande, you are like the plant manager, of course, here. We're at the heart of the industry, I might say. You're also a community member of VoltaChem. Can you tell me a little bit about what a community member does at VoltaChem?
Well, yeah, good question. And the community for us is a good group to talk to think of and discuss the future possibilities and the future needs of industry around us, but also the possibilities of this site, and also how we can develop as a currently power producing unit or a power producing site. Also evolve into what is necessary for the future of the surroundings in this port of Rotterdam, but also the wider community around.
Cool. We're going to discuss into depth of that with it, of course. We're also supported by SmartPort, a neutral knowledge hub, I had to say, and of course we are COVID-proof, right? We're all sitting. Good distance, important, very good. And we don't only have the guests here, we also have Ruud calling in from Germany. We will talk to him later. But today we're going to talk for the very first session about viable value change, the Northwest European industry region as electrified supercluster. And that's the power to integrate program line that you all might know, of course. Well, I'm not the expert in these topics. I'm the host. I make sure that we end right on time, but I have a beautiful co-host sitting here with me, Reinier Grimbergen. You're the principal consultant at VoltaChem TNO. What are you looking forward to mostly in these online sessions?
Yeah, thank you for your kind introduction, Jere. Now I think as VoltaChem we are of course first of all very happy to host this session together with Yolande here and Uniper and the partners. But what we hope to get is to get a joint feeling like we can do it. There is a highly integrated supercluster where we are in the middle of, and I think that's fantastic today, and we see that there needs to be something done for a fantastic tomorrow. And that is, I think, what we would like to explore today with these great table guests and the people online, to really get a joint feeling like, yes, it could look like this a bit, and this is the type of stuff that we need to make it a success.
It's also about imagining the future a bit?
Yes,
yeah?
it is.
Okay,
sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
Interesting, I think. So we have Yolande, already talked about her. We also have Frank with us, Frank Kuijpers, General Manager Corporate Sustainability at SABIC. Or do I say SABIC? SABIC.
SABIC.
SABIC,
Yeah.
Very good, SABIC, very good. And we have online, welcome to Ruud, calling in from Germany. And we were just discussing with each other, where is Ruud calling from? From Germany, but what place is Ruud calling from? And he's the corporate strategist of the Port of Rotterdam Authority. Ruud, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me?
Where are you exactly calling from?
I'm calling from a small tiny village called Fischerhude. And that is located in the region of Bremen.
Good to have you with us, and you will be, of course, part of the discussions here on the table as well. And we asked all of our table guests to do two things today, except for you, because you are the co-host, but you had to bring an item, a personal item, and a dilemma. And that's how we're gonna start this discussion off in a couple of minutes. But first, we need to address our most important guests today, and that are the ones that are actually viewing this live stream, of course, and you can be part of the discussion on this table as well. So you can log in with your mobile phone, and you have a QR code beneath the live stream, and there you can log in with your name, and there you can participate in polls, you can ask questions, and we can have all these questions here, and we can answer all your questions. Well, if you look at the program today, Reinier, we have many things we're going to do. We're going to discuss with each other. We have some dilemmas. We have some interaction. We have some pitches that I'm really looking forward to. But if we look a little bit broader, what's the end goal of today? What would you like to achieve in this 1.5 hours?
I hope that we here at the table and together with the audience get a good feel for this big change that I refer to. So we are here today, we are looking for a future that looks bright, but it takes a few steps to get there, and there are challenges. And I hope that we also can have here a very open, transparent discussion on these challenges, because it's not only nice and great and super, there are really some edgy stuff in there that needs to be addressed. And I think already knowing the people here on the table, I'm sure we will have that discussion and we will address it. And in that way also find ways exploring together how we can solve these dilemmas and challenges that we see in front of us.
Yeah, and maybe it's a little bit asking for what everyone knows already.
Yeah.
But when we look at the bigger picture, why you chose with VoltaChem to organize this? Why is it so relevant to you personally and to VoltaChem?
It is super relevant. The power to integrate is the relevancy of that is that we feel that for the electrification of the chemical industry, that is where VoltaChem stands for, that that needs integration into the existing assets and asset base, so to say, and there's a lot to gain still. And how do you integrate electrical processes into your operations today, during the transition, and also in the end game of maybe even new technologies that we need to really go to carbon neutral in the end. And I think that's what everybody is facing, a huge challenge, a huge ambition, like we want to be carbon neutral in 2050. And what are the puzzle pieces? I always say we need to make this puzzle together. That's an important element. We discussed just before the table setting here, that we need also a kind of leadership that fits to that. That is basically really collaboration with a capital C, and also a type of leadership that is connecting rather than dividing, and to really basically jointly address the challenges and get the maximum benefit out of it. To also have the supercluster where we are in, successful today, but maybe even more successful in that future.
Well, so can I respond to that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so I think that was a very good point that Reinier made here. So one thing you know for sure on the future is that you can't exactly describe how it's going to look like.
Yeah.
The other thing, which is good, I think, is to have a dot on the horizon. And you mentioned the dot on the horizon. That's about carbon neutrality, I think.
Yeah.
And we all know that we have to do quite some drastic transformation in the industry and society and what have you. And the most important thing is to get our act together. And I think, and that's really together, that is what you have to do jointly. And that's where we are here for, I think. We have to know how are the industries connected, how are we connected also to the utility suppliers, how can we all collaborate to make that work? Because the cluster is the strongest thing that can do that jointly, and if we don't, we might lose against the competition, and the competition might not be Europe.
All right. I think interesting topic to dive into, but I heard something else that Reinier said. You said we had to be carbon neutral 2050.
Yeah.
I read you want to be carbon neutral in 2035.
Yes, 35 is for us the aim, carbon neutral indeed, and that means that we are really looking ahead. We can't wait until the solutions of the future are there. We have to act now, and I think it's very important, as also Frank said, we have to find joint solutions in the end, but we all have to start looking for that now.
Good. I think because we're already going into depth, ladies and gentlemen, without actually knowing who is watching the live stream. So let's have a look at those people. So you could log in at voltachem.joinlive.tv or via the QR code. And when you go to live on your screen, on your mobile phone, then you can answer one of our questions. And we first would love to see where you are. But it's not voltachem.joinlive.tv. It's Power-2-X Tour 1.joinlive.tv. I had to have my glasses on to read it. Power-2-X Tour 1.joinlive.tv. There you can log in, and I see that many of you already did. You can also follow the QR code, of course. There you log in, and then we have a first question for you. So go to live, and we would love to see where from the world you are participating right now. So on your screen you see a map of the world, and there you can place your selfie on the map. What do we expect? Many in the Netherlands?
guess so.
Many from the Maasvlakte. It's really hard to pinpoint the Maasvlakte, I guess, on the map. But I see Australia, I see some in the US. We have an international crowd, ladies and gentlemen. Do you know who is participating from, I think it's Indonesia? Reinier, any ideas?
Indonesia. I
Singapore.
wouldn't know.
Singapore.
Singapore,
it
yeah,
is.
Singapore.
Singapore.
Yeah.
Who did you invite from Singapore?
I'm not sure.
You're not sure? It's great that you're watching.
Have, but I didn't.
It's great that you are watching. It's always
Absolutely.
lovely to see who is watching the stream and that we actually have a worldwide audience. Let's do another question. In which sector do you work? So we have some options for you here. In which sector do you work? And I think we can see the energy sector, process industry, equipment, supply and licenses, or the policy knowledge and industry organizations. Was this what you were expecting, Reinier, the audience?
Yeah, I like it. Although I would have, I'm a bit amazed by the policy that it's so big. But for the rest, the balance in the others is exactly what we hoped for, actually. So I'm very happy about those statistics.
Good. Let's.
But the policy is an important stakeholder.
Yeah.
Is it the most important one?
Well, I think that stakeholders are equally important. And so it's from society, it's investors, but policy is certainly a key stakeholder for us to make this transition really happen. Because the transformation doesn't happen overnight and doesn't happen with the support of the policymakers.
And Frank, maybe I'm going to ask you a question that you want to address in the end, but you have 50% policymakers watching this. What would you like to give them as a message or as a thing they should do?
It's more a generic message. And so policymakers can make the difference between the right instruments and the wrong instruments that they put in play. With that, I want to say we will talk at the end of about also circularity and how circularity connects to carbon neutrality, how electrification connects to carbon neutrality and to circularity.
Yeah.
And what is important for the policymakers to understand what is required in terms of instruments to drive the industry, to drive society into that direction. Because today you see too many instruments that drive sometimes in the wrong direction. And I can give you one example. We have in Europe something that is called the Renewable Energy Directive, by which we get 10% biofuels into the fuel pool, and we just burn that at the end of the day. And that's not a wise thing to do with a biofuel. A biofuel you can better use to make a chemical or a material that you use in circular solutions. So that's where the policymaker, I think, can make the difference.
Okay. Good.
If I may add, Frank, I think the challenge is that they look beyond the time now. Policy for now and for next year, of course, important, but policy after 2025 or after 2030. And that is where I feel that there is still a gap, and that I would really invite them to think
Long term.
long term.
Yeah.
Exactly.
If I may add as well, I think it's also the pre-discussion we had. In the end, it's about a lot of money that needs to be invested. So there needs to be some certainty for that. And the policy making also has a role there to secure for all of us that the investments done will have a return, and then based on the right incentives. And I think that is a challenge, and there's uncertainty there still. And I think we all need some form of certainty to basically guide the investments, the investments in the right direction with a good return and an acceptable risk.
I think a very critical remark here. So because we will spend our dollar only once at the end of the day. So and the dollars we spend are huge. I have to share that with you. But they can only spend once, and they need to be in the right direction. And being now at the front end of that transformation, let's better make sure that we spend them into the direction of that transformation. And because if we would spend them in the historic solutions, that's not going to make the difference.
Let's talk to Ruud, because he has, of course, a lot to say about this as well, because he is part of the Port of Rotterdam Authority, part of the Port of Rotterdam Authority. So, Ruud, how are you looking at policymakers, long-term, short-term? What are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, I think it's crucial that we in the next 10 years really have our infrastructure for the new era in place. And the new era won't be a fossil era; it will be a renewable era. So Now we have a fossil infrastructure. We have all kinds of crude oil and natural gas pipelines, and we bring in coal, etc. And this all made our port very big. This industry needs to change to renewables, but they need to be assisted with good infrastructure to do that. So they now rely on crude oil tankers and crude oil pipelines, and they will have to rely on bringing in circular carbon and green hydrogen in all kinds of forms, which we do not know yet what will be the best one. So we are also, as a port, investigating together with Smartport what kind of good flows will come in the future that will help this industry. And will it be e-fuels? What kind of e-fuels? What kind of production will take place in the port and in the hinterland? What is already produced in cheap hotspot renewable regions? So these kind of questions we try to answer and to give a view of the future that politicians and policymakers can rely on to spend their money on, also our money.
And Ruud, we also asked you, of course, to bring an item with you and to ask a dilemma to the other table guests, but also the viewers at home. Can you show us your item? I'm really looking forward to it. What is the item that you brought with you today?
Yeah, it's a thing I already have for over 40 years.
It matches the nice heat map we had with where is everybody located. So that's very good.
Yeah, sort of.
And what's the dilemma that you link to this item?
Yeah, first of all, this globe, it's both from a personal and a professional perspective that I have this globe as my item for this meeting. I already was fascinated by geography at school and how this planet Earth is really part of our galaxy, and we're all on this spaceship. It's a kind of a spaceship that is going on. We're all part of it, and it's beautiful, but it's also heavily influenced by humanity and what we do with it. So now we have this pandemic and we cannot travel over this Earth. Mm-hmm. We have climate change, which makes it also very difficult to live on this Earth. Biodiversity is at risk. So we do a lot of things with this beautiful planet and where we all own. And I'm part of that. And as a Port of Rotterdam, we also are part of that. And that is why it is for us very important to contribute to a better world than we now have. A world where we exploit too much and where we really are not doing the right things. So renewable energy and this whole electrification issue, all things based on solar and wind, is for us crucial. And what will be then the place of ports? So the dilemma would then be we will still be heavily dependent on energy from all kinds of places all over the world. It will not be coal from South Africa or crude oil from Russia, Middle East, or natural gas from Bulgaria, but it will be renewable energy from Australia, from Chile, from all kinds of places, Portugal and Morocco and Iceland, and all these countries I just mentioned are countries where we at the moment have connections with to develop renewable chains. So we are already.
Let's get to your dilemma, Ruud.
So the dilemma would then be, what are we going to import here and what are we going to produce here? So produce, what will be the future industrial cluster? What kind of commodity will they need? And what kind of products will they make? Will they still make the same products but then renewable? Or will we have to import products from production locations elsewhere? So how competitive will Europe be in the renewable world, and what will be the role of ports?
Reinier, let's take that to the table here. So what we will produce here and what will we import? We can ask the people at home to reply to that as well. Yeah. What are your ideas about it?
Yeah, I think what Ruud clearly indicates is that we have this at least dual challenge of the energy transition and the then the feedstock transition. And this feedstock has to become, for the chemistry, over the time, circular carbon instead of the fossil carbon. And there's also an interaction between them, and that was already mentioned. That can be through hydrogen and power storage and all these kind of things. So this challenge is, where will the raw materials of the future come from?
Yeah.
How they will be sourced on the one side, and where will the energy come from? Because the energy in the Netherlands, it has always been that we have never been able to produce our own energy, and also not for the whole industry. So it's always an import part of it. So how will that evolve if fossil is going to change and these feedstocks are coming in, and the electricity issue? Where's the electricity coming from? What are the limitations? What can be done over time, going to 2050, etc. But I think that also the other...
Yeah, but let's have a look at the results at home, because
Yeah.
I saw some mixed results over here. Here we go. You see, it's like 1/3 says production in the port of Rotterdam. I think those are all working at Uniper. I hope, at least, right, Yolande?
The surrounding industries,
And
potentially,
surrounding industries,
yeah.
of course, yeah. So how do you look at this dilemma?
Yeah,
It's a tough one, I think,
Yeah,
for
I
you.
think it's a tough one, and it does also relate to my dilemma. So I will not go into
Okay.
deep depth right now. But I think the combination of energy and feedstock is an interesting one, because they will be touching each other and being intertwined more and more. And that is actually also a challenge for us as energy company. The energy of now, of the current situation, the current system is electricity, is electrons. And the energy of the future may well be carried in other forms, molecules, whether it's H2, like hydrogen, or the molecules that we can build out of hydrogen, or the sustainable aviation fuels, all energy carriers different than electrons. And that is a challenge.
Let's get right into your dilemma then. I think that's a nice link,
Okay.
because you brought something as well.
Yeah.
Do you need any help with it?
No,
Because
no,
I know
no,
it's
I will
very
manage.
heavy.
I will manage, but it is heavy.
What are we looking at?
Yeah, I brought some power with me.
You brought some power.
Yeah.
It's like muscle power. Or was
Power
it
on the table. Yeah. I'm training to get there,
Exactly.
but no. No, this is actually as close as you can get to holding 380 kV power cable in this case. And for me, it symbolizes what we produce now, energy in the form of electricity. And the dilemma is actually, will we be doing that after 2030? And of course, coal exit is another topic, but in general, will there be sites in the Port of Rotterdam or in the Netherlands or in Europe that actually produce power? And that means power that you can turn on and off. So in professional language, we say dispatchable power. And if we want to produce it, what will then be our fuel? Will this be something that is also a feedstock for molecules that we just burn to make electricity? And how does that relate in the value chain of actually the C molecules that you can use?
And is that the dilemma?
Yeah, so the dilemma is actually produce power in the future or not, and be solely reliant on the weather and wind and sun.
Okay, let's ask that to our viewers, but let's go to Frank to respond to that. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think that for sure it's a dilemma, and so I think that we face that too. So for sure we require electricity as an industry for even the transformations that we're seeing. We are going to electrify, and beyond electrification of current assets. If you look into the breakthrough technologies, they for sure will be based on electricity too. So then electricity is the backbone required. Will that come through, let's say, power grids, or will that come to very local power stations fired by hydrogen, or whatever the solution is? It's an interesting dilemma, I think, but maybe we should also take into consideration we went through 4 or 5 decades of globalization, and we now see over the past couple of years deglobalization.
Well, I
Maybe
think especially the last 1.5 years.
Yeah, maybe
right?
partially coming through Trump or other mechanisms, But you also have to think about deglobalization in terms of your logistics, the costs that are associated, but not only the cost directly, but also indirectly in terms of the additional fuel you need to transport all the material. So all of that put together is an interesting dilemma on how that moves forward. On the other hand, anything that Uniper or we invest needs to stay there for another 3-4 decades again, because we are not going to invest for something for the next 5 years.
Of course.
So we have to have some certainty, not only from the policymakers, but also from how that technologically, but also from a economics point of view, will fly over time.
I can imagine. Let's have a look at the results and see if they match
curious.
your expectations.
Maybe we
So
can get
here
some
they
advice.
are, and most of them said
Yes.
to produce power at the Maasvlakte site in the future. Well,
Wow.
lucky
okay.
you can stay here for
Yeah. We'll just find another fuel then.
a longer time. And I know already what you brought with you today, Frank, because if we talk about power, you need to test.
You need to test it.
You
So-
need to test the power, of course.
So this is a power tester, and it's a very small, of course, compared
want
to
to,
the.
yeah, you want to
Yeah.
test that one?
Well,
No, stay. Oh, yes, very good, very
but,
good.
I think that for us, the dilemma is exactly what I just mentioned before. Is that in order for us to go into this transformation, which we already are doing, and we are already taking our first steps. We have to be able to, on the one hand, rely on the policymaker with that horizon of more than 4 years, but we also have to rely on the availability of electricity. So if we are now going to electrify, where maybe in 10 years from now, the use of electricity will 4 times, 5 times the electricity that we use today, then we need that 380 kV by then. So we need to be able to be sure that it's there when we start our new units. So that's the dilemma. Will the power be there for us once we are ready to electrify?
Will the power be there once we are ready to electrify? I actually came into this discussion 2 hours ago that you were talking about how many 100 gigawatts and we need to have blah, blah. I was like, what are they talking about? But that is the dilemma. Let's ask that to our viewers. Reinier, back to you.
Yeah.
This dilemma.
Yeah, it's very recognizable, and it's the core of VoltaChem, I would say, because we are developing technologies in VoltaChem together with our partners, which rely on electricity.
Yeah.
So, simple, if the electricity will not be there, we have an issue, I would say.
You need it.
And that's 2 elements. It's the generation and it's the transportation or the transmission. And that is, of course, a question of the infrastructure. And Frank told me, and maybe I cannot share it, but I share it anyway, like, I'm going to start anyway with or without cables. So,
He is like, I'm just going to start,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
No, but we need to move, otherwise we will not meet the 2050 target. So there's no time to wait. And then it's about synchronicity, so to get things in sync. And I think that is the challenge that Frank brings up here, also his dilemma. Like, I cannot wait for the policymakers or for anyone to really make a decision. I need to move. So how do we do that jointly? I think that is the challenge.
The challenge we have.
Yeah.
Well, let's have a look at your results and then we go to our pitches, of course. So you have almost a 50-50 division, I see. The industry will be available in due time or will not be available. You see, there, half of them is doubting if it will be available on time.
That's why it's a dilemma, I think.
Yeah, I think
It's a true dilemma.
It's not if it is or it isn't available. The dilemma is, of course, what can we do to make sure that it is available?
But you see that there are some people, and 50% of the audience doesn't believe that it's available. And so that's why you can see that we require all the forces, the policymaker, us, the utility provider, also the grid provider, to make this happen.
Do you believe it will be available on time?
Yes, I'm convinced.
Yolande? You have doubts?
Yeah, I have doubts.
Reinier?
I think it will be a big challenge, but it is also important that it links to the import-export question, because that is the direct effect. So if the electricity won't be available to the supercluster, we won't be available to produce carbon neutral in a sense, to some extent. So it's one or the other. So if we don't manage, we have a real issue. And I'm an optimist. I'm a technology optimist, and I'm also an optimist in society. So I think we will find a way, but it is a tough cookie.
It's a tough cookie. Let's go to Ruud. Thumbs up or thumbs down, Ruud? Are we going to make it in time?
Well, 50-50 is also in my mind. So half of my mind says yes, half of my mind says no.
But maybe we should all talk to
It will
Reinier.
require decisions very early in this decade to be able to have infrastructure available later in the decade. So especially when it concerns electricity, but also hydrogen infrastructure, also CO2 infrastructure. This will all be needed. And for CO2, we are really making good progress. So by 2024, there will be a carbon capture storage system that will be crucial also to produce blue hydrogen. That is also climate neutral hydrogen for the industry. But if you also want to have green hydrogen available on a large scale, then you need these chains. So you need import terminals and you need a pipeline system to the hinterland. And that is where we have to decide very quickly to be able to have that available. Also, for example, for Frank's Gemmelot site.
Yeah, well, lots of things need to be decided in the near future, and that's why we discuss it right now, of course. Ruud, Yolande, Frank, thanks for your items and your dilemmas. I think, Reinier, it's time to have a look at our pictures. Because we have some online guests with us today.
Exactly.
You're looking at me like, what are you going to do? No, but we have some guests, and good for you who are watching the live stream, of course, is that every pitch will end with an interactive question to you guys. You can ask questions via the Q&A tab, and we can ask these questions as well, but we're going to respond to the pitches or the presentations, of course, as well. And the first one is actually calling in from London, and it's Olivier Maronneaud, Director of Chemical Consulting at IHS Markit. How are you there in London, Olivier?
I'm very good. Good morning or good afternoon, depending where you are. Everything's okay here. Thank you very much.
You have a very nice arty collection behind you, I must say. It's really,
Thank
it
you.
looks beautiful. It looks beautiful. Well, let's give the floor to you. 5 minutes time to present to us your ideas and findings. Good luck.
Yeah, thank you very much. Today I wanted to kind of give you a little bit of context and give a bit of an overview of the ARRRA cluster and positioning the cluster when we talk about chemicals. I'm not sure what's going on with the map. It just seems it's not really looking very well. I'll explain. So basically, when we talk about the ARRRA cluster and mainly really kind of looking at Belgium and the Netherlands and part of Germany, we talk about kind of roughly about 50% of the wider chemical capacities, production capacities that we have in the region, with, as you can see, about kind of 20% or slightly more than that in the ARRRA region, and about kind of 27 in Germany, but a good chunk of that sits in what I would call the wider ARRRA cluster. So it is a significant part of the chemical industry in West Europe, and it's quite interesting because when we look at those capacities and the value chains that are covered in this region, you can see some clear focus on certain value chains. And I mean, I would mention very roughly kind of ammonia, olefins, with crackers and aromatics. Those are the kind of key value chains that we have especially in the kind of ARRRA region, kind of Netherlands and Belgium. And obviously, when you take the wider kind of ARRRA clusters, then that covers a much wider kind of production center. So it is significant when we talk about chemicals, and it is significant not just for I would say existing production units, but it's also a region where we have seen a lot of investment and a lot of focus from companies to either kind of develop existing sites or even build up new production projects. And those are just kind of a few that I mentioned. And those covers both the upstream with some, as you can see, PDH, so propane dehydration units, steam crackers that have been announced as well, but also further downstream as well into more the integrated value chains that are already existing in the region. Next slide, please. Yeah, I apologize for the setting that doesn't seem to have fitted quite well. But the other key points when we talk about the kind of the ARRRA region is really the connection of the cluster with the region, with the wider industry in the region. And this connection, I mean, obviously is made through the existing infrastructures, whether we're talking about ports, railways, barges along the Rhine and so on. But it really shows the high level of integration that we have between production units and companies in the area. And one way to look at it very at a high level, it's when you look at the level of import and exports that we see in the region, and how those kind of trade flows kind of relates, whether within the region versus international trade, and also in terms of the type of chemicals that are traded. And I think what is interesting here is that you see a lot of interland connection between the ARRRA region, so mainly kind of Netherlands and Belgium with the rest of the region. And that is very interesting. And in most cases, you see more export than you see import. So technically, you see kind of the region being a net exporting, so really focusing on production and exporting the end products. But you also have a smaller share of what I would call kind of international trade flows, so really focusing on trade flows from West Europe and from ARRRA to the rest of the world. And not surprisingly, that tends to be mainly focusing on imports rather than exports. And that's really the structure of the European industry. And when you look at these by type of chemicals, what is interesting is the imports tend to mainly relate to the building blocks. So what we call the kind of starting point in terms of your chemicals to then build up to your value chain. And those building blocks, for example, could be as a key importers, could be methanol or ammonia. And on the other hand, when you look at export, then the ARRRA regions tend to export more of the end products, which again is not surprising, whether it's export with the rest of the region or to the outside. So I think that dynamic is very interesting. Yeah.
I think very interesting data. We're talking about ARRRA. We need to make sure that everybody knows what ARRRA, of course, is. Can you get towards the interactive poll, the question you have for the audience?
Yes, absolutely. So if you move to the next slide, and then I will have the question. The last point that is obviously very critical in Europe is the competitiveness of the industry, and this is just very a quick benchmark around kind of key products that unfortunately you can't see, but it's basically ammonia, methanol, and then ethylene, and the last one is, I'm sorry for the minor technical issues here, alkali basically. And you can see that in most cases Europe tends to be a higher cost region, and to some respect quite disadvantaged, but in some other products kind of still competitive. And so my question really, if you could move to the next slide, my question to the audience is kind of, would you believe electrification, that is the key topic of today's discussion, would be more relevant to existing units, and whether that's an optimization in terms of production cost or just from a carbon aspect? Or would you see more electrification as a feedstock for kind of developing new production units in the region, and maybe eventually support the kind of import-export imbalance that we currently see in the region?
I think, first of all, thanks Olivier for your contribution. Reinier, ARRRA, quick explanation, what is it?
That's the Antwerp-Rhine-Ruhr region, and Rotterdam, of course.
Of course, yes, you forgot the most important one.
So that's basically the whole cluster from the sea inward Europe, up to Ludwigshafen. That's the big chemical industry. And I think that Olivier gave a very nice overview of basically the import-export balance that we have today. And of course, his question is, how will that evolve over time?
And let's ask, I think, Ruud to respond to that, because he is the one that knows everything about this, I think. Ruud, how do you look at the, I hope so, at the question that Olivier posed?
Yeah, first of all, good presentation, and very clear also that we have a competitive issue. We already had it for decades, by the way. And still we have this supercluster here, and still it's functioning. Antwerp-Rotterdam-Rhine-Ruhr Area, so a few concrete examples. We have Shell here in Rotterdam, and we have Shell Rhineland. We have BP here in Rotterdam, and we have BP Gelsenkirchen. We have ExxonMobil Rotterdam, ExxonMobil Antwerp. We have Total, who is in Zeeland and Antwerp, and they source via Rotterdam. So this is a cluster that is really very much connected, and I give some examples of the refineries, the oil, but it's also about chemicals. And we have an integrated ethylene grid here, everybody connected to it. So what you see in the slides is ammonia, methanol. It is mainly imported, imported because it's cheaper. Olefins are here produced very much. We have a very good olefins position, but we are, as a Western Europe region, a little bit more expensive because we base it on naphtha and not on ethane. It's clear that we already have not so good a competitive position in fossils. But it is not a deciding factor that we then will import everything. We still produce here. It's all about geopolitics as well. We all want to produce in our own continents our own products also. And as long as there are real commodities on a world market to be traded and ports that can bring it in, then we have a position. And that is exactly the position in renewable energy that we want to create, in circular carbon and in hydrogen. That we again have these commodities available for the industry so that they can make their products. But it will be a mixture. It will partly be produced here, partly will be imports of finished products, just as it is now. So
a lot of nodding here. I see a lot of nodding here at the table. Reinier, totally agree.
Now, I recognize the picture and the challenge, of course, how this will evolve. And I think Ruud nicely mentions the new upcoming feedstocks, like the bio feedstocks, and maybe over time also carbon capture and utilization, which needs, of course, a whole lot of electricity again. So there we are again with the electricity question. Yep. It's all interconnected. And but maybe I don't know if there's time that Frank can comment on it from his side.
Yes, but we are a little bit limited on time because there's so much to say on this part. But we have to mention Field Lab Rotterdam. Yeah. Because that's, I think, one of the examples on how it's done.
Exactly.
And Frank, do you know anything about Field Lab Rotterdam, or am I?
Of course, but what I would like to add to what Reinier just mentioned is that we have to also bear in mind that the economic systems are going to change. So the cost model of today is not the cost model of 3 decades from today. There will be, beyond the normal cost, the normal financials, also non-financials into the denominator of our business models in the future. So our company's ESG responsibilities will play a role at a certain moment in time. And that will bring also the, let's say, part of the comparison that Ruud just mentioned in terms of will our position in Europe be sustainable on the long term? I'm convinced of that, but that will require the entire world to move into that same direction at the end.
Yeah, you cannot only do it here, of course.
Of course.
That won't work, no.
And if I may add on the field lab specifically, because that is important. Of course, we have this great opportunity in Rotterdam, where we have created this field lab where basically new technologies can be demonstrated and scaled up to basically become viable in that future. So I think that's a fantastic platform that's here in the region to test and pilot and scale up these new technologies that will be needed to basically be successful in that future. That's what I wanted to mention.
Yeah. Good. Yeah. I think a nice addition, and here we see the results, of course, to Olivier's question he had, electrification can help to address the import-export imbalance with potential new developments. 60%. Well done. We unfortunately don't have time for the questions that came in for Olivier, but we'll make sure you will get them all, Olivier, so that you know what people still want to know. Let's go to our second pitch, which is Francesca Boshell, our team lead renewable energy technology innovation. Lots of words at IRENA. Francesco, how are you?
Very good, thank you so much.
Good to have you. I'm really looking forward to your 5 minutes of fame. Take it away.
Thank you so much. Yes, basically I have 5 key messages I would like to share with you. I don't know if we can have the slides on the screen. The first one is renewable electricity generation. What you see on the screen is the annual additional generation capacity at global scale. And the blue lines or the blue bars are the renewable generation, the new added renewable generation, and the gray are the new fossil fuel generation. And what you can see is that since 2012, there is a clear trend of reduce new generation from fossil fuels and increase new generation from renewables. Actually, in 2019, more than 70% of all new additional generation, electricity generation, was from renewables. And last year, despite the pandemic, we had another record year for wind and solar, more than 100 gigawatts of photovoltaic, more than 70 gigawatts, and in terms of share, actually more than 90% of new capacity generation was from renewables. So this is going much faster than anyone would have expected a few years ago. Now, looking into a future aligned with a 1.5 degree scenario, or the ambitious Paris Agreement scenario, we will see that most of this electricity capacity would be basically in East Asia, around 40%. In North America, around 20%. So East Asia and North America, maybe 60% of total electricity capacity. And in the EU 28, we expect around 10% of global installed capacity. So the first point here is, are we already prepared to operate power systems dominated by PV and wind? We have our answer, which is yes, we can do it, but is maybe something for the audience. The next slide, please. The next point I want to make is about the cost competitiveness of renewable electricity. And what we see on the chart is for each technology, solar photovoltaic, concentrated solar power, or onshore and offshore wind, how the cost is being reduced quite dramatically. The blue lines are the levelized cost of electricity of projects which are already producing electricity, and the orange ones are the that to be commissioned in the next 2 or 3 years based on auction pricing. And what we see is that photovoltaic and onshore wind already are more competitive than the most competitive fossil fuel option, reaching prices around 4 cents per kilowatt hour at global average. But of course, we see projects with much lower prices than that, like in Chile, in Middle East, with prices even below 2 cents per kilowatt hour. Now, at the country level, we see some differences in the cost competitiveness. We see very low prices already on average in China and India, around 6 cents per kilowatt hour. In Italy and Spain, around 9. Germany 10 cents, and in France a little bit higher, 15 cents per kilowatt hour. And of course the question is, why these differences between neighboring countries with maybe similar resources? And the answer is also the balance of system and the soft cost. That's something that we still need to continue to improve, to continue to reduce the cost in certain areas. But the key message is that renewable electricity is becoming cost competitive in every region, including, of course, the ARRRA region as well. The next slide, please. The third point I want to make is, of course, because we have so much competitive or cheap renewable electricity, we should electrify everything to the possible extent. And this is the trend we are seeing with all these Power-2-X trends. According to our analysis, in a 2050 scenario, the share of electricity in the total energy consumption will increase from today's 20% to more than 50%. And in total generation consumption, we will move from today's 22,000 terawatt hours to more than 70,000 terawatt hours by 2050. And if so, a threefold increase. And if we see the bar on the right side, the first light green component we see there is actually production of hydrogen through electrolysis. And we expect that by 2050, we need to consume more than 20,000 terawatt hours just to produce green electricity. Just to put that in context, it means that all the electricity produced today globally should be used in 2050 just to produce green hydrogen. So that's the level of magnitude. So the message here is that Power-2-X means massive renewable electricity generation in the future. Next slide, please. The fourth point is about infrastructure. So what we see on the right side are the expected investments for the energy transition cumulative between now and 2050. We need more than 130 trillion US dollars to be invested. But what is interesting here is that in terms of renewable generation would be around 30% of the investments, but infrastructure, so transmission, distribution systems, charging for electric cars, etc., will be around 20%, more than 30 US dollar trillions to be invested. So it's a huge order of magnitude in investment in infrastructure. Now, the question is, can we optimize those investments? Well, the solution is a smart electrification. So if we have an on-control or what we call a dome electrification approach, this would be much costly in terms of system cost. So we need a smart electrification to actually reduce that. And the difference is not insignificant. For example, for some utilities like in Hamburg, they did the analysis for electric vehicles. The difference between a smart and a dome electrification is 1 to 10. So basically 20 million investments per year against 220 million in a smart electrification.
Francesco, let's get to your final point because we need to cut on time. Yes.
And the last point is when we think about Power-2-X, of course, we say, okay, this is an electricity issue. There is no maybe need for the bio discussion, but actually if we think about synthetic fuels, we really need to engage the bioenergy industry because of the CO2 that we need for the synthetic fuels. And of course, the ARRRA region and the Port of Rotterdam has a strengthening on that because of the bio industry there. So the question is, should we have also in the table that you have there at Rotterdam today, also the bioenergy industry present and discussing how they could also be providing the needed CO2 at a cost of capture below 20 US dollars per ton of CO2 capture. So this is my last point. Thank you.
And what is the question that you want to pose here on the table, Francesco?
Yeah, well, I guess basically my question is why the bioenergy industry is not sitting with you there.
Okay, I see Yolande laughing. Why are you laughing?
Well, of course, I saw the picture that was on the slide where coal is going into a power plant, but also biomass is going into a power plant. And that is exactly what we do right here at the Maasvlakte. We combine both type of fuels, and up to 20% is already bio-based. Mm-hmm. When I understand the question correctly, is actually the hinting, why don't we burn more biomass to make the electricity bio-based, to at least cover some of the security of supply and the need of electricity in the future.
And that's something that you would.
And that is something
what
that
you already do, and what you would love to do more.
What we technically can do much more, but of course we also know that it's very heavily debated, at least in the Netherlands, and that is something that is a bit differently seen in countries around us, but in the Netherlands it's heavily debated.
How's the discussion worldwide, Reinier? Yolande says in the Netherlands it's heavily debated. Is it different all over the world, how they look at bio-based?
I think it's really different over the countries, and it is. I think it's also a kind of pragmatism in there. What are the sources that we have? So we have to come to the total amount, and then you also have to select sometimes options that you might want to choose differently. But then in the end you need X amount. So how to get there? So then what's then the alternative? And I think what Francesco also hints to is to the fuels, to biofuels against e-fuels type of, or and e-fuels type of discussion, which is then, of course, how will that evolve? Because CO2 direct air capture is expensive and is technological possible, but a challenge. Biomass is also there that you can use as a carbon feedstock, I would say also for Frank and his plastics, but also for fuels. And how will that balance out?
The way we see this in a smaller perspective, when we look at the future of our site, we envisage a biorefinery sitting there on one side of the plot and creating bio-based molecules, actually use it in RED II and for mobility. But the green CO2 that comes from that can be combined with the green hydrogen that we also expect to produce here on site because of the proximity of the wind power landing here. And then green H2 and green CO2 can be sustainable aviation fuels in future. So when we can do this in small on one site, the question actually is, how can we do this big in the ARRRA region? And maybe a site as ours is suitable for all of that, but would it not be more effective to do it in a bigger scale?
But what I conclude just from these first two pitches is that you guys need to talk with each other. That's the thing,
do.
right? I know you do. I know you do. But it's also, if we can we get Francesco back? Francesco, I think you have only fans here on this side. Let's also have a look on the responses of the audience on the question you posed. Let's have a look. You see, our bio industry is engaged in the synthetic fuel discussion. Well, most of the people say yes, but still, then what is it? 25% say no. So there's still 25% that needs to be on this table as well, I think, that we need to involve in the discussions we have.
Yeah, but I think if I quickly can react on it, I think there is, of course, the kind of end game is that you would like to provide that we start burning molecules. That in the end we need to find a way to gradually get out of there. So that's probably the background of that category. But the reality is that we are faced with requirements that we cannot meet today. And there's this gap and there's this transition.
But do we need to get the requirements lower then, or how do you see that? Or
no, I think it needs to be. It's a phase in, phase out type of transition that takes time and needs technology development and needs scale. And that's exactly, I think, what Yolande mentions, where also sites like this can play a fantastic role, I would say, in innovation and in moving forward towards that new future.
Good. I see. Can I add one thing?
Final remark, yes.
Because I also think that you have to look gradually in the value of your biomass. Because some of the, let's say, the waste biomass that you can easily use to generate power is probably not valuable for the chemical industry, and so it's not a base for the chemical industry nor for the food industry. Whereas we had a debate on whether the agricultural is also in competition for food as well as for chemicals or for power. So we have to be very clear on when we take decisions that we're not in competition with the food chain on the one hand, that we're not chopping forests for just powering our electricity grid, and that at the same time we look at what is the highest value of the biomass that we have available.
And that's what we need to do. Because I see people waving, we have a lot of questions. Let's have a look on some questions that popped in for Francesco. Can we get the first question on the screen, please? From Mark, do you think there's enough attention for CO2 as a feedstock in government? What needs to be done in terms of policy in this matter? Francesco, did you copy the question?
Yes, I did. I think there is awareness at the policymakers level on the need for CO2 for these power to chemicals to work. Because the electricity part is kind of taken for granted. It's going very well. I mean, if we continue like this in terms of renewables, etc. But we need also the CO2 to produce the methanol, to produce the synthetic fuels. And it's not just about having power plants burning biomass. And this is maybe something that was misinterpreted from my comment. I was discussing more of other bio industries like pulp and paper, sugarcane, etc., where you can actually have the concentrations needed to capture as CO2 coming from a bio industry and then use that in combination with the green hydrogen to produce the methanol, the synthetic fuels, etc. So, and as we are saying, the Port of Rotterdam has this cluster of bio-industries. So can we, as Uniper was mentioning, expand that and have really the magnitude of CO2 capture at a low cost that is needed to produce these commodities?
Good. Thanks, Mark, for your question, and Francesca for the response, of course. And I think enough food for debate. Is that what we can say? Food for debate?
Yep.
Yeah, something like that, right? I think it's an English expression. It will work. And it links nicely to a challenge that we have for you guys, or at least it's a little bit of trivia that you can answer right now. Who has the lowest carbon footprint electricity production in 2019? And we have a map of Europe, and you can pinpoint your selfie or your name on the map. Let's have a look at that, and then we go to our third pitch already. But many people think France. We go to Norway. What would you think, Yolande, who has the lowest carbon footprint?
They're making a distinction between hydropower and nuclear power.
Yeah. I heard that this was the toughest question that we could answer at this table, because there's so much debate on how you actually measure this, I think, right?
Okay. So this feels a bit like an exam, but
I
will not take it like that.
Okay. Reinier, what would you answer? Is it one of the Nordics? I see many people in the Nordics.
I think I think if I'm right, the question was for the EU 28. That's important, because this is not EU 20. It's a bit a tricky question then, because in Europe, in fact, if you do not EU 28, it's Iceland by far. Mm-hmm. And then maybe people might think, okay, then there's Switzerland with a lot of hydro. Yeah. There's Sweden. Yeah. And Sweden is EU 28. Okay. And basically Switzerland isn't. So I think the answer is in that direction.
Somewhere over there. Yeah. I also see some people in the direction of Iceland. Yeah. So well done. Let's go to Florian Ausfelder, who is calling in from Frankfurt, Germany, and is head of the energy and climate team at DECHEMA or DECHEMA. Good to have you with us. And let's give the floor to you for the next 5 minutes. Florian Ausfelder.
Thank you very much. Can you see and hear me?
No, we cannot see you right now. It's a big black box. We can hear you, yes, that's the good part.
That's the good part. So why is that box black? Let's see.
Yes, we now see the slides. Yes, that works as well. And there you are. There you are. Good.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sorry for the technical.
No problem. Okay. Take it away.
I would like to start off with showing energy use of the German industry. And you see in this graph, you can look for it, you won't find an x-axis, but you have a y-axis, and you see big circles. And the big circles on display are showing how much primary energy goes into a certain industry. And the colors represent the kind of energy that goes into the industry. And you see quite a few big bubbles on the lower part of the graph, and these are all these industries that transform and produce primary materials. That's steel, chemicals, cement, and so on. And then you see the industries that go farther up in the graph. Those are the ones that actually make money. For example, the famous German car industry. But they have a relatively low energy need. A similar picture holds for emissions, which I'm not going to display here. Next slide, please. So the impact of the chemical industry is actually huge. If you take feedstock into account, it accounts for 15% of the overall final energy demand in Germany. And it's so big that if you try to plot the industry energy demand on a county level, you can easily identify these big circles, and these are chemical sites. It's Ludwigshafen, it's Marl, it's Gelsenkirchen, and so on. To give you an idea, if you look at the size of Berlin, all the industry in Berlin is dwarfed by any of the chemical sites that you can see. And this is a challenge because we will need to replace the chemical feedstock, which is predominantly oil and gas at the moment, by something else. This something else might be, as discussed before, hydrogen, maybe in combination with CO2, biomass, recycling, and so on. And you can argue the amounts they will have. But since the fossil feedstock at the moment actually brings in its own energy and CO2 doesn't, we will need to replace it. And that is what we're expecting. For the chemical feedstock alone, overall, twice as much energy will be required as it is now. And this energy will be different. It will be for a good part electricity rather than just molecules. If you think of hydrogen being a molecule born out of electricity, if you want to think of it that way. Which in turn means there's no way that Germany would be able to supply all the electricity just to produce hydrogen and other compounds for the chemical industry. There will need to be a significant amount of import, as we see it at the moment as well. Next slide, please. So how's Germany going along with it? Germany has founded a lot of energy partnerships on a bilateral basis with quite a different set of countries. However, the question is, does it make more sense to have a European approach or to go to that bilateral approach? I would argue for the European approach. And if you go to the next slide, then I will focus on why I think it is important. So the chemical industry in the ARRRA cluster at the moment is globally competitive. And that even though we have relatively high raw material and energy and labor cost. So why is that? Well, of course, a lot of stock is actually or consists of depreciated plants. We have the advantage, as already mentioned, of an integrated multinational infrastructure. We have ports, refineries, chemical sites, and the connection to the other industries. And we have the proximity to the major market. The question is, can we go to the new world and at least keep the advantages? We know we will face some disadvantages, but can we manage to keep these advantages and make them pay into the system so that we remain competitive? That would mean we still require a high level of integration, maybe with additional industries integrated. We probably need substantial financial support for new plants. And we need to adapt our infrastructure. By that I mean, of course, we will see new pipelines. But if we can manage to rather transform one infrastructure into, let's say, a new purpose, rather than building everything from scratch, then we can actually make use of our assets we already have. We also still need to remain inside a major market. So the chemical industry is not independent of whatever other industries do and how they develop in Europe. But we will continue to face high costs on the same ones as we have at the moment. Next slide, please. So my question is, how do we value the existing multinational integrated infrastructures that we have, and how do we transform them in the energy transition? And a second smaller statement, I think it is quite important that we don't think on a national basis, but on a European basis and along the value chains, because one of the advantages of the European Union is that we can get rid of the national borders, and this is a huge advantage in a region like the ARRRA region. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Florian. And I think we have already been discussing this, of course, get rid of national borders. Maybe that's a little bit extreme, right? Frank, how are you looking at the story of Florian?
Yeah, I think that I'm very much, let's say, with him in terms of make sure that we keep integrated or even integrate more where that is necessary. And I think that if you look into utilize existing assets, we have to do that to the maximum extent as possible. And if you then look into, for instance, how can we use the existing grid for instance, the fossil fuel that now goes to the sites with biofuels in the future or biofeedstock in the future. So that's one thing to look at. On the other hand, you also have to be open to, if you look at a circular economy and you know that part of your product will be circular, that circular will be probably different from a logistics point of view than your mainstream of fuel and feedstock that is coming today through Rotterdam to, at the end of the day, Ludwigshaven. And that's where we have to be both looking at what we have as assets today, how can we maximize the integration to a new system that we require with new feedstocks that we will have in 30 years from now. At the same time, look into alternatives like recycling through mechanical recycling in plastics, but also through chemical recycling of plastics, making a new fuel, which is different from a logistics point of view, and which will create also different, let's say, ecosystems. On the other hand, we have to think beyond the chemical sector. That's where I think we have to think in ecosystems. We have to make the cross-sector approach between the energy sector and the chemical sector to make sure that we're all integrated with the same objective.
And that's the power to integrate, right?
I think that's spot on, and that's exactly. And again, in the pre-discussion, we had a very nice chat on it. Like the roles are changing. I think Yolande also indicates you're looking for a kind of repositioning, and I think that's happening on the energy side, where electrons and molecules are under discussion, but it's also happening on the chemical side. Where it's happening, but it's also happening in the steel, it's also happening in the cement that Florian perfectly illustrates, because these are the big emitters, and we need, let's say, really material solutions to cut those emissions. And I think this is the perfect example why power to integrate is so important.
Let's have a look at our viewers' opinions, of course, on the question that Florian posed. Look at that, it's 100% score.
Oh.
Yes, it's like cool. North Korea over here. It's like 100% score that agrees with the statement. Well done. Let's see if we also have questions to Florian. Here we are. Can we get it one bigger? Yes. Can policy be really effective when it only focuses on one commodity, Willem wants to know, like CO2 or H2, rather than using an integrated view? What's the role of national policies in this perspective? I think, well, I think we should go to Florian about this, right? And maybe to Ruud to comment on that as well, because Florian, you already stated that you want to get rid of the national borders a little bit on this topic.
Yes, I'm quite happy of doing that. Well, to the first part of the question, I think we should really stop thinking of absolute solutions. There is no silver bullet. And we will have solutions which will consist in parts of, let's say, recycling, and parts of biomass, and other parts of H2 plus CO2. So we should be open and evaluate all of these solutions according to their merit. And they will all play a part, and it might be a different solution for each location. So it's not having like one absolute solution, no silver bullet. The second part, we see, well, I mean, Germany is the largest country within the European Union, and it's kind of like used to try to get its will around, and that is a problem. So each of the countries follow their own energy policy at the moment. And even though the European Union is trying to coordinate it, it's time consuming, and I don't think they are always successful in what they want to do. However, we will have, you might remember actually the time that due to the way the Germans funded their electricity system, they kicked out some of the Dutch gas-fired power plants with their own coal-fired power plants out of the energy system, which is a bit counterproductive in any sense. And so that's why I think we need a European solution, and the role of national policies. If they provide incentives, the incentives should not act as disincentives somewhere else.
Exactly. Ruud, you living in Germany, we were talking about that, of course, small town in Germany. How do you feel about this topic? Or is it for you a no-brainer as well?
Yeah, no-brainer. I always say Rotterdam is the biggest German port. So there are more good flows destined for Germany going via Rotterdam than via any other port, including German ports. So that alone is already enough to say that we should look beyond national borders and national policies. And we should really have a at least Northwest European view on energy and raw material transition. For example, ThyssenKrupp at Duisburg They have their terminal here in Rotterdam, and they bring in iron ore and coke coal via Rotterdam. When they are going to be totally renewable, they don't need any of these coke coal anymore. Instead of that, they need hydrogen. So then ports like our port should be able to bring in this hydrogen. This is beyond national policy. It is simply a matter of European industrial policy and European welfare. So in that respect, I should say it is a no-brainer because, as you know, we take the global perspective.
Is again, but I think if I may conclude, it's something that we're really happy about, that the policymakers are here and that you can also see how important policy is to make this happen, right? The decentive, the incentive, making sure that everybody works together. The Port of Rotterdam as the Port of Europe, maybe, you know, these are the things that we need to discuss. Let's go to our final pitch already. Arij van Berkel, Vice President Research at Lux Research. Good to have you with us. What do you take away from the previous discussions, Arij?
Yes, good afternoon by now. So happy to be here. Let's see if I also can see my slides in a moment. But what do I take away from the previous discussions? That's actually what I wanted to start with, which really is about electricity and can we get enough electricity, right? What does it mean for industry if you're going to fully electrify in a region like Europe, where you already are struggling to get enough electricity for the current use of electricity? Germany has this objective to have 65% renewable electricity in the mix. And that's already hard to do. And meanwhile, everyone else is starting to use electricity, so we need a lot more of it. So if we go to the next slide, here's a way to look at it, right? This is the IEA Sustainable Development Scenario looking at 2040, right? And then you can see how the use of energy is distributed in Europe. This is all of Europe. And you can see how much industry is using, how much transportation is using, how much is used in buildings. And I also included feedstock, because remember, nowadays feedstock is containing chemical energy, but if you want to make feedstock out of CO2, you actually have to put in the equivalent amount of energy. So that's also an energy consumption. And then you can see in that same scenario, the degree of electrification of that energy, right? So in 2040, in the most optimistic scenario that the IEA came up with, 42% of that energy used in industry is electricity. So the other half, roughly more than half, is still is still fuels, is still basically oil-based, coal, something like that. Transportation, 29%, buildings, also roughly half. So we're still apparently burning a lot of fuels to heat our homes. So more than 60% of Europe's energy needs will not yet be electrified by 2040, which means that you need to find another 26 exajoule of electricity if you want to fully electrify everything. Half of that, 13 exajoules needed for heat. That's important, remember that. And you still need to find about 6 exajoule for transportation, right, which is about a quarter of that 26. If you want to do all of that from Europe, you need to double electricity production compared to the 2040 level, which is already significantly higher than today's level. So people might get desperate looking at this, and the good news is this is the wrong way to look at it, in my opinion. And the theme of today is power to integrate, and I really want to make a case for rethinking integration. And also I would like to bring in an additional perspective. We talked about integrating between the electricity sector and the chemical sector. I would like to bring into the picture the built environment, just the people living in the ARRRA region, right? Basically everyone around the table, myself included, Ruud included, those people are really important. And while we go to the next slide, let me take a moment to disagree with Florian here. Florian, on one of your slides, you had this comparison between the old chemical cluster and the new green chemical cluster. And you had a couple of bullets, and one of the bullets was the same for the old and the new cluster. And that bullet read expensive raw materials, expensive energy, and expensive labor. And that was the same for the old cluster and for the new cluster. And that's where I disagree with you. I think there's a unique opportunity to obtain cheap energy and cheap raw materials for the ARRRA cluster. So the first thing here is integrating with feedstock. And we cover emerging technologies. So I listed a number of technology developers here that are developing technologies that I think should be embraced by the ARRRA cluster, and that the ARRRA cluster should try to foster and to help launch. Right? This is where these technologies should be implemented first in the ARRRA cluster. Liquid wind is an example. Right? They make wind power to methanol. What's difficult about turning wind power into methanol? Not making, well, the hydrogen is kind of difficult. There's a couple of questions about how to use an electrolyzer if your electricity supply is changing. But the real difficulty is getting your CO2. And that is really something that is hard to do in most parts of the world and is not easy, but easier to do over here. Battery recycling. For battery recycling, you need large-scale units and you need a lot of lower temperature heat. Where do we have a lot of lower temperature heat available, and where can we build large-scale facilities, and where do we have a lot of access to depleted batteries? Over here. So go talk to these people at Düsseldorf. A really weird one here, Ruud. They are actually proposing that you pyrolyze your own waste at home in order to create heat for your home. So you will no longer be burning natural gas in your central heating boiler. You'll be burning your own waste in your central heating boiler. And again, it helps solve heat, but it also helps to provide raw materials. And finally, Boston Metal, who is building electrochemical, so basically electrolysis units for scrap metal recycling. So that's on the feedstock side, but the other important thing that we need to consider is the heat side, which is on the next slide.
Ari, can you summarize this slide for us?
Yes, I won't go through all of the companies. Yes. I will have them make their own advertisement. The main takeaway here is really about thermodynamics. So today we make electricity out of heat, and we accept that we are throwing away a lot of the heat because that's a thermodynamic reality. If you want to make electricity out of heat, the price is that you discard a lot of heat. But now we're going all electric, and that really changes the whole equation, right? The electrical energy that you are putting in is not going away. It's getting dissipated into heat. And if you can control that process, you can use the heat again. So the purpose, the challenge for us, the power to integrate challenge here is use the energy and the electricity once, gather it, it will be there at as heat, mostly at a somewhat lower temperature, use it again. And maybe after that, use it once more and use it again and again and again. And the more times we can make use of that energy, because the energy doesn't disappear, the cheaper it gets. So if you buy electricity once and you use it 5 times, obviously that is cheap energy.
Yeah.
So finally, last slide. I think the ARRRA region is uniquely positioned to do this, to show how you can do that. And why is it uniquely positioned? Because it has a concentrated source of recyclable materials. It also means that we need to reverse some of the materials flows. We need to get materials from Germany to the port of Rotterdam, because that's where the large installations are. But also it is connected to the densest population areas, which is really important because that's how you can integrate effectively with heat, for example.
Thanks.
So my
Arie.
question to the audience is, how do you create, are we positioned, are we able to connect to the population? Are we able to create that kind of system integration? Because no single company can do this.
We were talking about rethinking integration, Yolande. I see many arrows going from or to the Maasvlakte. That's a good thing, right? How are you looking at this issue?
Yeah,
Can we do this?
Actually, I'm really happy with this presentation because Arij mentioned when you look at all the numbers, you could be depressed. Like, can we make it?
Yeah.
How difficult is this? But he gave it a twist that is really about integration on all levels. And actually, I'm happy with the options that he gave us. And I think it shows that it's not only about recycling and reusing as much as you can, but also integrating classical industry with new insights, combining industry with households, but also the bigger corporates with startups potentially. So it's integration on a lot of levels. And in the end, he made me enthusiastic about thermodynamics, and that is really
That's
also
something. That's something.
That is something.
That's something you can come
No,
up
so
with.
I really see a lot of good things in this presentation, good options.
Frank, do you agree?
I do agree.
Just as enthusiastic as Yolande is, or a little bit more?
Maybe a little bit less.
Maybe a little bit less.
Yeah,
Okay.
because I think that the big issue that we might still face is the companies like ours are pretty big and are also slow in making these transformations into integrating and thinking very different from the value chain and the part in the value chain that they've played before, and now they might have to play a very different role and create different ecosystems, new value chains, and using the waste within, let's say, the community itself. So it does take time. It does take, let's say, maybe a new generation. And what I would like to see is also that new generation takes the lead in this. And because what I think is very difficult for companies like ours is to really make that transformation with the old generation people. I might be the old generation people, by the way. But we have to bring in that new thinking in how you can create these solutions in an integrated way. Also making sure that there is let's say, a life beyond this that is still at the same level of well-being as we have today.
But I feel that you totally agree with Arie, but
do.
you only think it's a difficult task.
Yeah, I think
And you're like, oh no, this is going to be hard, right, to do. Let's have a look at Ruud, of course. Ruud, are you still there? Yes.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. What do you take away from Arie's story?
Yeah, that integrate is much more than only integrating on an industrial level. It's integrating on a societal level.
Yeah.
So, and that in most studies I see from an industrial perspective, that is not really part of the equation. It's more about how we can take up renewables in big plants and all on big scale. So, and that's also logical because for us as a port, we are more looking into this kind of combinations. But it's again, it is important. What will be the fuel of households? So already people say a household will use hydrogen. Well, I'm not sure about that. If that's really the preferable option for making heat in households. So I'm very glad to see that there are all kinds of developments here that make it really much more synergetic, and then you need less feedstock. Of course, this will also mean less good flows, but then again, that's if it's more optimized, it's better.
Good. Reinier, I've been observing you with all the pitches, and I think I've only seen you doing this all the time. You are really happy with the pitches, I think, right? With the
maybe I can add one remark, only also in view of the time. I think what the clear point that Arie makes, I think, and I like it a lot as being an innovator from history, that innovation comes to startups. And I think I always say 80% of the technologies in the chemical industry are there. They are on the shelf, they need to be activated, they need to be invested in, and the investment should be sound, etc. But we also need the 20%, and I think what Ari perfectly showed is that the way to do that in an ecosystem, in the ARRRA cluster, where we have very knowledgeable people, highly educated people, that there is an ecosystem that makes sense to start to get these startups in to help us and come up with this 20% that is needed. So I think bringing that together, super. And it's also, again, I would say, a form of power to integrate.
Exactly, and let's integrate and wrap up this session as well. First, of course, I would like to thank all our pitchers, presenters, Florian, Ari, Francesco and Olivier for their contribution. Well, I was really happy with the discussion. I think if I have to conclude this, wow, there is so much to talk about. We shouldn't do only one Power to Integrate session. We can do weeks of Power to Integrate talk shows because there's so many topics we didn't cover yet, and sometimes I wanted to really deep dive into something, but we just didn't have the time for now. But the good thing is that we have some time after this session as well, in which you can deep dive with the guests on our table. So with Reinier, of course with Frank, with Ruud, who's still online, and of course with you as well. So they can talk everything what they still want to know about these topics that we have been discussing today. There's one final thing I want to ask all of you. What do we take away? What do we take away from this session? Can I start with you?
Yeah, I take away that although it's a lot about numbers, it's also about finding the options and making the impossible possible by combining old thinking, new thinking and new leadership.
Making the impossible possible. We'll just put that on the wall. Yolande, making the impossible possible.
Yeah.
As for you, Frank, what can I put on the wall for you?
New leadership and just start.
New leadership and just start. Ruud, your main takeaway of today?
Infrastructure.
Infrastructure. Reinier?
Yeah, to me it's about integration, the energy transition with the feedstock transition and all that interaction. And I think we touched upon that, and I think that's the name.
You
of
need
the
a little bit bigger tile for that, maybe, but we can work on that as well. And I think a final question that we would love to know from you guys as well, watching this live stream is, what do you believe to be the most critical factor for the electrification of the chemical industry to succeed in Northwestern Europe? And you have 4 options, and we are keen to see the results coming in. Let me explain to you guys, that to you viewers of course, that we have a Teams call afterwards. You can find it in your email, so feel welcome to join this session. But first, before we go there, I want to have a look into the future, because at June 30th we have another session.
Yep.
What are we going to do next time, Reinier?
Yeah. Thanks for that. So the next, the session 2, so to say, of this Power-to-X Tour will be about integration of capture and conversion of CO2 electrochemically. I think we touched upon it. This is more focusing on the technology, not on the integration. Then the third one, if I may, it will be on hydrogen. So was on the table big time. So that will be fully focusing on innovation in hydrogen production technologies. And the last one is very, very interesting. That's, I think, the cliffhanger. That's the upcoming Power-to-X technologies. And I can lift a tip of the secret here. This is about things like, think about plasma type of technologies, kind of new electrified technologies that might be very strategic to the chemistry.
Cool. Frank, Yolande, Ruud, Reinier, thanks for your contributions. If you want to be part of these next couple of sessions, you can subscribe at voltachem.com because these Power-to-X tours, they are of course supplied by you guys, and therefore we will end this stream with a little video of what VoltaChem is and what they do. Then you guys have you guys. Why am I saying you guys? You guys and girls. It's like really informal. But Yolande and Ruud and Frank and Reinier have time to run to their Teams calls so that they are there as well. Thank you for watching the very first of our online talk shows. I hope to see you next time. Have a good day.
the challenge of drastically reducing CO2 emissions by 2050. Currently, around 20% of the emissions come from the process industry. For the manufacturing of essential products such as fuel, fertilizer, metal and plastic, we currently use fossil resources like coal, oil, and gas. This has to change. In order to reduce the use of fossil resources and CO2 emissions, we need to decarbonize energy consumption and recarbonize raw materials. We do this by applying recycled products, biomass and CO2 as renewable raw materials, and by switching to green electricity as an energy source for production. That is VoltaChem's main focus, accelerating industrial electrification. In our innovation program, we develop new technologies in close cooperation with the process industry, equipment suppliers, and electricity suppliers. We can integrate these into existing production processes, and at the same time, we come up with innovations together with our members and partners for a completely emission-free future in 2050. We focus on 3 technology domains: power to heat, industrial heat technology based on sustainable electricity, such as heat pumps, electric boilers, and direct electric heating; power to hydrogen, cost-effective electrolysis technology for the production of industrial hydrogen and its integration into industry; and power to chemicals, advanced electrochemical production processes to make fuels and chemical building blocks based on renewable raw materials, such as biomass and CO2. Through our Power to Integrate technology domain, we work on an overall system change. Our experts analyze and assist companies and clusters to reduce emissions and optimize costs through innovative electrification, both now and in the future. VoltaChem has been working on the electrification of the industry since 2014 and contributes effectively to achieving the 2050 climate goals. Will you join us? VoltaChem.com